Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, my name is Estrella. I'm a business development coordinator with University of Guelph School of Continuous Studies. And at CSCS, we help individuals and organizations build the skills they need to adapt, grow, and thrive in a changing world through flexible, career-focused learning. Today's webinar, Evidence-Based Decision-Making, Making Better Decisions in an AI-Driven World, explore how leaders can cut through information overload, reduce bias, and make more confident, evidence-informed decisions using practical frameworks and responsible AI. We are pleased to welcome Mariel Mading, Manager of Professional and Workforce Learning and Innovation at the University of Guelph School of Continuous Studies. Mariel brings a unique blend of expertise, leadership, innovation, and adult learning, with master's degrees in arts education and strategic foresight and innovation. She's passionate about helping organizations and professionals develop the skills needed to navigate complexity and make better decisions in evolving workplace. With that, I hand things over to Mariel.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to have all of you join us here today on a rainy day. Looking forward to today's presentation. So with that, our agenda for today is just going to give quick land acknowledgement, as well as just talk briefly about the University of Guelph and the School of Continuing Studies. Then I'm going to talk around the leadership shift and how clarity is the real new strategic advantage that we need. We're going to meet our lovely manager that we're going to be working with today, Priya. She is our scenario that we're going to walk through. We're going to walk through the framework, and then we're going to talk more about AI, and then we're going to speak to communicating the decision at the end. So with that, before we begin with our presentation, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we're on. The University of Guelph campus is located between the Lakes Purchase, confirmed in 1792. The treaty and the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. Our campuses also reside within the Dish with One Spoon wampum, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe and their allied nations to share this land and its resources peaceably. I also want to take a moment to recognize the Attawandaron people, whose presence here is part of the archaeological record and who are no longer an independent nation today. The Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee continue to hold a unique, long-standing, and ongoing relationship with this land and with one another. And it's important that we recognize that relationship as living and present, not something confined to the past. As the School of Continuing Studies, naming this land is a starting point for us, one small part of how we try to hold our work within intention and responsibility and within the communities that we serve. With that, welcome. I am speaking to you today from the School of Continuing Studies on campus, where we believe learning should fit into your life, not the other way around. We build our programming to be flexible, supportive, and people first, and grounded in the idea that learning is an experience, not just a transaction. Whether you're here to sharpen a skill, lead with more confidence, or simply make sense of a world that's throwing more information at you than you can process, that's exactly the space we're here today. With that, let's bring us to why we're here, moving from information overload to informed action. And just again, today is really for anyone, a leader, if you're buried in detail, rushed into a call, and stuck justifying a decision potentially after the fact, that's who today's session is for. So, the leadership shift. Clarity is the new competitive advantage, particularly when you're dealing with data. What has happened in our environment today? Leaders, we increasingly face the realities of working and living in a VUCA environment. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. In reality, what trends worked and helped us to make decisions 10 years ago don't stand in the same light as they do now. We deal with a very different and complex and ever-changing reality. Data has to have a very different meaning, and the context and data itself shifts much more rapidly. New technologies, AI has entered into the mix. We now have so many dashboards, so many predictive tools, and just access to more information than we've ever really had the ability to collect and manipulate beforehand. With this, and particularly with the VUCA environment, we now just have an erosion of trust. Boards, funders, employees, everyone no longer take anyone's call just at face value. They expect the reasoning to be shown. Privacy and data concerns, particularly in the age of AI. What you collect and how you use it is increasingly scrutinized, not just assumed to be fine. The validity of the data itself is a greater conversation. And with all of that, as leaders, we are expected to make decisions as fast as we possibly can, sometimes at the speed of light, it feels like. Decisions that used to be expected to take weeks, now expected into days, compressing the time available for evidence gathering. So, with all of that in mind, as leaders, ultimately now, the ones who are pulling ahead are the ones who actually are disciplined enough to know what matters in the data. We have so much information and all of this around us. It now comes back to what actually matters, the questions you're asking, and helping to cut through all of that noise that our employees face, our organizations make, our stakeholders see, everyone. So a question for you to kind of ponder through the rest of this presentation, and I'll leave you with, is what about you? How much of the data your team collects actually helps improves decision-making versus just adding complexity and potential delay? So with that, how do you actually get clarity in all of this, with all of this information, everything coming? So clarity typically breaks down throughout the entire process, but there's really key critical points where we see a major breakdown in clarity. Two happen before you ever really even touch the data. One, are you actually asking the right question to begin with as you go and search for your answer? And we're going to talk a lot about questions today. Ask the wrong question, and no amount of good data will get you the right answer, to be quite frank. The wrong data set. It's, for many of us, I'm wondering if you're facing the challenge of working with data sets and questions that we have asked 5 years ago that don't necessarily address what you're actually needing to answer today. And again, have you actually updated your data sets based on what you're now facing? We might be adding more information, but are you really stepping back to say what's vital and what's not? Again, starting to clear through that noise. And then once you actually have data, data in and of itself will always have an element of bias. It will always be shaped by the individual or the organization who collected it and how before you ever even see it. And data will always have an element of incomplete. I like to call data, it's a snapshot with edges. It's only ever going to reflect a moment in time and only what someone thought to ask, right? So ultimately now as we face AI, all of these additional softwares that help us to crunch the data and help us to cut through everything, a better software just makes the wrong question easier to answer faster. It doesn't make it the right question to ask to begin with. So we'll take these on a little bit and one at a time. All right. So data, information, and knowledge. These are terms that we use interchangeably in our language, but they actually have a very different meaning. And particularly when you start to think about AI, as it's now coming into the conversation, it's really important to recognize the distinction. So similar words, very different meaning. And they ultimately follow the journey of data. Data itself is raw and inert. It's an enrollment number. 21 is data. On its own, it doesn't tell you anything. It's not good, not bad, it's not a trend. Information is data with context. Enrollment over 4 years, 42, 38, 29, 21 is information. Now you can start to begin to see patterns. It starts to answer that question, what happened? It doesn't necessarily answer why fully yet at this point. Knowledge is information plus interpretation, connected to experience, and is understood well enough to be acted upon. So having all of that data, et cetera, and then asking and understanding why enrollment dropped and what that means for the program is actually now knowledge. That's the layer that in part a lot of organizations really stop short of, is getting and moving all of that data through the points and coming back to what's the question that we're asking, and then how do we move that and help, and how does that actually help you create the knowledge you need to answer the questions and drive your decisions as you move forward. So hold this enrollment example loosely. It's not random. Priya is going to get handed a report very similarly to this. Data information that's dressed up to look like a complete picture with that knowledge layer and interpretation missing. So keep this in the back pocket. It's really important. All right. A little bit about bias. Bias in and of itself can be an entire webinar on its own. It's very complex and it happens throughout the entire data process into whatever degrees. There's typically two really strong points where it does come into play, and it can have huge ramifications for your entire data collection that you're looking at. And let me be very clear, AI and none of these tools actually reduce bias. They just make it less visible and often make you look more authoritative to begin with. So bias typically happens in collection. One example is selection bias. We measure what's easy to collect. Some data is really hard to collect. Measurement bias. How the tool collects the data will always shape the data. So if you have a survey tool versus something else, you're going to get a different way that those questions are asked and the information is gathered and how people actually respond to them. A lot of times people treat surveys as very formal, so they're not going to necessarily give you everything. They're also really concerned around what that data and how that data is going to be used. So that's going to shape innately how they answer those questions to begin with. And historical bias, as has sociocultural prejudices and inequalities are mirrored very commonly onto modern data processes. Bias in the analysis is another part. So now that we have the data, as we're starting to analyze our data, typically, and this is very much a human experience, we tend to notice evidence that confirms what we already believe. It's so common. It's just what happens typically. Attribution bias. So we might, what do we weigh as more important than the other? Sometimes we weigh one characteristic much more than the other, but we're not really taking that step back and really asking the question. And now with machine learning, AI, and all of these other pieces, they will pull and they will magnify the biases that already exist. It is trained on the data that it's trained on, and whatever biases come from that data, that will be amplifying. So as a leader, as you're looking and making evidence-based decisions, the issue and the skill isn't actually about eliminating bias completely. There will always be, again, how you ask the questions, the tool that you ask will always help to shape that data. But it's really important to ask yourself throughout the whole process, whose experience is this data actually reflecting? What values are we perpetuating in this data? What information are we not actually collecting? Whose voices are not included in this? So ask yourself throughout this. And again, at the analysis phase, who's analyzing the data? That's going to have a very different perspective. Having someone who's known something for 20 years versus someone who has never really had a vision into something, they might come up with very different analyses. Just as a reminder, data always reflects the moment that it was collected. Data reflects the questions that were asked and to whom, and data reflects who collected it. So these gaps aren't failures, and I don't want you to think of that in some ways that they can be inevitable, but it's really important as you are looking at your evidence, and ultimately when you communicate it, you understand the data in and of itself and what these biases could and should not and could have been, and how you've mitigated them where possible. The question behind the question. As leaders, you know, the amount of times I've gotten asked, is this program working? I actually had this question asked of me about 2 hours ago. It's not a very strong question. And ultimately, why are we even asking that question? How do we frame these so that it's a really strong question? So, for example, is this program working? Working for whom? By what standard? Over what time frame? Compared to what? Working sounds like it's a yes or no question, but this isn't one. It has no comparison point. It doesn't say for whom, and it quietly conflates outputs, outcomes, and impact all into one word. It skips over value entirely, frankly, and value is really the thing that you're actually being asked to judge. It doesn't help you also frame how you're going to actually answer that question. So I always, when I'm looking at questions that I'm asking, I'm always asking, is this going to help me answer the question? Particularly when you're looking at data. That's a really important kind of check to balance out with. All right, what data? So as a leader, as the reality faces that we face right now, you are pressured to make decisions so quickly. It can be really hard to step back and be like, what is the actual question that I'm supposed to ask? But also, what data do I actually need? It's very tempting to focus on the data that you already have instead of stepping back and asking the question, what data do you already need to answer the question? Data typically falls in any organization into two generally broad categories, and they innately have their own biases to begin with. Quantitative data is numbers, metrics, counts, trends. This tends to feel very objective. When people see numbers, we tend to see it as, oh, great, it's a number. It's truthful, it's accurate, it's precise. But that precision can create a false sense of completeness. Numbers can be just as flawed as getting a text sent to you from a survey with all of these perspectives from people. There can be a lot of flaw in numbers. So examples for you that you might see in your own organization: enrollment data, website conversion rate, NPS scores, finances could come into this play. There's lots of quantitative data that we see in our organizations. Qualitative data, observations, narrative, feedback, themes. Much harder to aggregate, often much more costly and time-consuming to obtain and scale. It's much easier to send out a survey asking and getting quantifiable data, so numbers, than it is to have 4 focus groups with 20 people, right? Very different. Qualitative data has a tendency of being considered soft. However, it often helps to answer the why behind numbers. Some examples are open-ended survey comments, exit interviews, if you're in HR, themes from a focus group, etc. What is really important is as you are looking to answer your questions, asking what data you have, what data you need. And I would say generally most questions require a combination of these two data sets. It's important to take a step back and again, to ask what's missing. All right. So we're talking about evidence-based decision-making. So what does it actually mean? Particularly in the role of AI, when we start to say, well, we can just outsource all of our decisions to AI. No, there is a lot of things that still have to have the human in the conversation, and we'll talk more about that later. So evidence-based here, it's the process of making informed, objective choices by integrating the best available information, organizational data, professional expertise, and stakeholder values. It's really aimed to replace the solely opinionated or intuition-driven choices with rigorous critical analysis to increase the likelihood of positive outcomes. So the process here is really important. In the past, we could have said, oh, well, this happened because it's summer and people are on vacation. That's why we're seeing this. That might still be true, but not actually going through the process of asking the questions. You might be making an assumption based on historical information without really actually understanding why. And the why could be a very different reason, but you're making an assumption. So it's really asking to ensure that you have the evidence backing your decision. However, none of this runs on autopilot. Evidence does not interpret itself. It still takes your judgment as a leader to weigh signals that disagree. We're going to see a lot of that in our scenario today. Discernment to know what's missing. You might get a whole bunch of information, but what's missing? Do you actually have everything that you need? Maybe you don't. Maybe you need to go back. And the critical thinking to resist the answer that you were hoping for. And critical thinking, again, to ask and reflect on bias and where and how tools can support the conversation and amplify that, not take away. As we have faced all of this decisions, a judgment is really hard, and data and all of these tools can help us with the judgment, but they can also equally make it harder for us to exercise our judgment. Your wisdom is still yours to supply and is absolutely vital. So, meeting Priya. Priya is a manager, and she's going to be our scenario today. So we're going to walk through the framework with her as if she was having to make an actual decision. So Priya. Priya's a manager at a mid-sized professional services organization. She's been asked to recommend whether to continue, redesign, or discontinue a leadership development program that's been running for 4 years. Her leadership is looking at resourcing, and ultimately they want a recommendation rather swiftly. So here's what she's gotten. This is her data that she has it now. So enrollment, 4 years, wow, a 50% decline. You've gone from 42 to 21. Okay. Cost per participant. Year 1 was at $800. Now you're at $1,200. That's effectively a 55% increase. Your completion rate, 91% among those who enroll. All right. Satisfaction score, potentially quite high. 87% rate is valuable or highly valuable. That's definitely a strong indicator. Organizational reach is 4.2% of eligible workforce over the past 4 years. All right. So Priya, she's gotten this information. She's asked to make a decision. Well, on first read, before she's gone through a framework and before she's asked questions, she's ultimately probably already formed a view. So let's be honest, the financial signal hits first. Cost is up by 55% and enrollment is down by 50%. That's the shape of a failing program. The operational signals started to confirm it. 4.2% reach over 4 years, low reach, low impact. The experiential signal at this point just starts to feel like a footnote. Well, if it's not reaching anyone and it's costing us, that's lovely that people have wonderful experiences, but doesn't really feel like a program that's viable. So this starts to feel like a very simple decision. Discontinue it. All right. So here's where we start to go through a framework. So she can actually really take a step back and make an evidence-informed decision to move forward. So there's seven evidence-informed steps. I'm going to show you all of the steps, and then we're going to walk through each of them one by one. So here's our framework for today. The first step is establishing your strategic context. You as a leader understand what's going on in your organization, and this is so vital when you're making decisions. You know what needs to be weighed more than the other, right? Defining the question. What's the actual decision you need to make? What are the most effective questions that you need to help make that decision? Acquiring the best evidence. Take the time to define what you need and assess what you have. Appraising the evidence. This is where you really start to go in into actually looking at what you have. Aggregate and synthesize. This is where you start to organize all of your information into trends and correlations and insights. Applying the decision, apply it, and then learning from your decision. This is a step that often people miss because, hey, you've got probably 50 other decisions that you need to make as a leader, but it's really important to kind of take a step back and say what worked, what didn't, what did I learn from this experience, etc. Part of this would also be communication. I'm going to cover communication separately so we can delve into it with a bit of nuance. All right. So step 1. Priya's first instinct in her initial read was to treat this overall as a cost effectiveness question. But that's not the only question and value that she could be placing on that data and the decision she ultimately needs to answer. And before touching any evidence, the strategic context needs to be made clear because the same numbers support different calls depending upon what's actually driving the decision. For example, depending upon different contexts, one or more of these could have a much greater weight in her decision. So if your organization is under budget pressure, then sure, cost efficiency is a very legitimate lens. The financial and operational data will weigh heavily. Sure, the question, is it worth what it costs, is very appropriate. Absolutely. But what if leadership development was a stated strategic priority? Well, then some of that other information like reach and depth of impact are vital measures and need to be taken and weighed, potentially more than some of the costs, or certainly in line with those pieces. What if the question was about next year's portfolio? Well, then the decision isn't necessarily about the program alone. It's a mix of everything else. So what are the other pieces that are going on in the portfolio itself? So ultimately, same data, different context, completely different decision. This is a hard one to do. Again, when you're time crunched, you've got to make a recommendation to your boss, you've got to get a decision out to your team, or your team is asking for your decision, which might slow them down. It's a very important step and people want to skip it. But this is where it's a really important conversation to have, particularly considering your stakeholders. If you don't surface and agree strategic context out loud, people will silently assume their own, and they might disagree on the recommendation later without ever realizing they were answering probably different questions and maybe putting more value into different strategic contexts, right? So getting explicit here with people, even briefly, just helps to prevent some of that down the line challenges that you might have with the recommendation and communication. Steps 2 and 3. Probably the easiest to skip as well. But they are vital questions and vital steps to take. So define the question is step 2, and then acquiring the evidence is step 3. So I've put here 2 different questions and more effective questions that Priya could be asking of her data and what she really needs to look at to make an evidence-informed decision. So is the current format working? And if not, is the problem the program or the conditions around it? Basically, what's not working about it? But this is a bit more of a refined question, one that she can really take and examine and ask and acquire evidence for. If enrollment is declining, is that a program quality problem or an access problem? Very different. So on one side here, you see evidence that she has. She's got enrollment trends, cost per participant, completion rate, satisfaction score, and organizational reach. Evidence she needs. She should probably be seeking why enrollment was declining, because you don't have that at this point. And 50% is significant. What participants did differently in the training? Very different signal of impact and value, potentially. What managers observed post-program, who took the training and why, and whether a competing priority affected uptake. Was there something else going on? Was the training being offered at the same time as budgets? Probably going to change how people might uptake into the program. Doing this properly is often perceived as costly. It means time, it means probably more meetings or conversations, and it probably will delay when you get to the answer. But that's exactly why skipping it is expensive. It's just expensive in a very different currency. A decision built on data that was never right, that gets to look decisive today and wrong in 6 months, means once again, you have to go back to the drawing board, and now you're going to face additional risk, additional costs, and all of the implications that happen long term. So this is a point where, as a leader, taking the time to slow yourself down and also potentially your team to say, what are you actually asking and what information do you need? I've worked in a lot of organizations and I've seen a lot of very outdated data sets where 80% of the data that we collect isn't used to help to shape the informations. It's just old data. And when we're actually looking at the information we have, we're not collecting a significant portion of information and data that we need to be gathering. So it is important to take that step and come back to these pieces. All right. So adding on to our scenario, if I was Priya, I would be looking to see what other information I could gather to help me make this decision. Because I don't personally feel like I have enough at this point in time. So I'd be looking to see what I could get potentially quickly, or if I had time to kind of pursue more information. So she did. She took some additional time. She got 2 new pieces of data for us. So her reason for enrollment, she did a quick pulse survey sent to non-eligible employees, only in year 4, but at least she got some data. Well, manager didn't approve the time away at 43% is pretty significant. You've got some other stats there, wasn't aware of the program, didn't see a clear career benefit, and then you've got 8% other. All right. You also now have a bit of a participant profile. So who actually enrolled, and now you have role and location. And this is actually an average over the past 4 years. So that's great. You now have a really different understanding of who is actually attending the program. All right, so keeping this new data in mind, this is now when we actually start to appraise the evidence. And appraising the evidence means asking one question of everything in front of you. Can I trust this? And what exactly is this telling me? Not all evidence is equally reliable, and the signals in Priya's data are pointing in very different directions. Sometimes what matters is the data that you actually don't have. So just going through a couple of the pieces of evidence here and really looking at what the information is actually telling us to help us understand here and put potentially value on that too. So organizational reads, 4.2% sounds low. It's a low number, but low compared to what? Without a benchmark or an organizational target, it's frankly a number without a standard. So that might be in some of the strategic context that she has. If it's a leadership directive, well, then this is probably low. But if this is something else, then it might be within reason, right? Cost per participant. This is a great example where bias and numbers feel accurate and perceive a value and accuracy, but not necessarily. Rising cost per participant here is arithmetic. It's not necessarily real evidence. Fewer people sharing the same fixed cost will always push the per person number up. That's math. It's not necessarily a verdict on the value of the offering. A different potential metric to have explored could have been how much staff resourcing goes into running the program versus the return on investment. So there could be other things to look at from a financial side that would be showing you where you're putting your time and resources, which might then help you more actively say, oh, well, saying yes to this means no to something else. That's more effective. Participant profile, so this was some of our new data. It's accurate as a count of who showed up. It doesn't necessarily say who's eligible and skipped or who was never nominated. But it does start to answer low reach among who. You start to get a bit of a picture in terms of what your audience is actually in this program currently. All right, aggregate and synthesize. So once again, one of the questions we're exploring is the current format working? And if not, is the problem the program or the conditions around it? So the tension that we're facing is Priya. Enrollment is down, cost per participant is up, looks up 50%, 55%. That starts to look like a bit of a failure when you start to pull these pieces together. 91% completion, 87% satisfaction looks like a success. What's missing? Well, arguably, if this was a question of quality, you might have actually had other indicators. You might have had people dropping out of the course itself. The real problem's actually named. So now that you've had this new pieces of data come in, you're starting to really understand what the actual problems are and can more clearly define them. So these new pieces of data start to suggest that it's an access problem, not necessarily a quality problem. 43% of non-enrollees were blocked by their manager, very different. Awareness gap of 31% never knew the program existed. That's a lot of people. Uneven reach was concentrated in the head office and individual contributors. So if a manager blocked it, that's not just a vibe. That's actually just about the process itself. 41% never heard about it isn't disinterest, it's a communication failure. And participant profile starts to show that these are unevenly distributed across your audiences. So at this part with the synthesis is done, I like to say synthesis is done is when I actually start to say, here's the very clear problem that I have to answer, and here's how to answer the problem. So it needs determined a short list of named problems specific enough that you can deal with the next step. It's very easy to address an awareness gap, right? All right, now as we move on to a couple of our final phases, act and learn. So you've got the problem, you've got right size fix, and then you've got some other mixed match here. Ultimately, you've got 3 problems with varying levels that you can address in terms of the fixes themselves. You still have pieces that aren't known. Why didn't managers authorize? Or timing, a perceived value, or just not a priority? Each point have a different fix. And the data still doesn't currently say which, but it certainly gives you more information to start to interrogate and to move forward with your recommendation in general about how to proceed. This is where, as a manager, you also need to take into account your risk. Discontinuing a program in this context could mean significant amount of dollars, and if wrong, requires a lot of time and energy and money to get it up and running again. One more thing to learn from this. If a program's actual goal was never clearly established and communicated, that's a problem in the first place. So that would be one big thing that I would be learning from this experience. If it wasn't clearly articulated what the value was to begin with, then you don't really understand what you're actually trying to make the decision about, right? So at this point, I would be starting to make my final recommendation. And in this case, I would be saying, I want to continue the program. Here's my 3 fixes. Some of these are very easy to tackle. Some of these are going to take more time and more energy, and you can start to work. Even just doing one can be a trigger and can give you a signal if it's working or not. So, hey, if you work with your Marcoms team to get more of the awareness out, well, then you can start to see, is that supporting enrolling numbers moving forward? All right. Okay, so that's how to start to make a decision and go through your flow. At this point, we've asked our question, we've gathered our information, we've gone through all of these pieces, and now AI is in the room, and AI can help us out and help our judgment as well as also hinder it. So let's talk a little bit more about AI. AI is a tool that can synthesize vast amounts of information instantly and present it with a tone of expertise. That sounds like a gift, but it comes with a big catch. Typically, AI has kind of 2 distinct modes that you can start to categorize in your decision making. You can use AI-assisted decision making. That's where it's kind of a thinking partner. It can help you surface insights. It can help surface all of those patterns when you're looking at data. It can help with synthesizing that information. But a human still needs to make a final call, and this is really relevant for most leadership decisions, certainly the ones that I face on a daily basis. AI decision-driven decision making is where AI takes a much more full control within a very clear set of boundaries or sandbox. It can execute at speed and often without human intervention at that point in time. It's very useful for high volume, repetitive operational decisions. So fraud flagging is one where I've heard about this one being used. Inventory reordering. It's not appropriate for complex, high stakes, and context-dependent leadership calls. So let's see what Priya did. Priya, before she went through her framework, she put through all of the data that she had into AI, and she got back a recommendation. So the AI generated output based on the data provided, enrollment declined 50%, etc. Her recommendation is to discontinue, reallocate resources to higher reach learning modalities. It sounds authoritative, and it uses the data correctly, but only as far as it goes. And this is where, as a leader, you need to recognize where AI has a role in the conversation and the role you still need to take in the conversation when making evidence-based decisions. It wasn't asked about enrollment drivers, so it didn't consider them. Has no data on post-program outcomes, so couldn't really weigh long-term value. Has no organizational context, doesn't understand what high reach even means, and it was asked for a recommendation, so it gave it one. And with confidence that will reflect the prompt, not the evidence itself. AI ultimately is a synthesis tool, not a judgment tool. And this is a really hard part to talk about, particularly when we're talking about asking questions and making sure we have the right data. AI can do a lot as you work through data. It can help support your synthesis, but it only ever answers the question you had. AI has no instinct to just trust a number. A person can appraise the evidence. It can ask, can I trust it? AI doesn't know that. AI processes what's there as if it's already trustworthy. Fluent output feels understanding, and it isn't. And that fluency is probably the most dangerous part with AI, because it's exactly where it can make a wrong mistake or a shallow answer very easy to believe. AI typically it will not deal with your bias in your data. It will perpetuate the bias in the data. It will replicate it and confidently. Ultimately, AI is a tool. It's useful, it's fast, and it helps, but the human still needs to take into account. So there are a lot of frameworks out there, and as your organizations continue to understand and look at AI and what you want to and how you want to frame it, I do encourage you to take a look at the frameworks. One framework that we typically focus on here is what's called human-centered AI. So traditional AI was typically built on automation and optimization, but human-centered AI starts from a very different goal. It puts the human's needs and values and capabilities first. It's designed to strengthen your judgment and not replace it. And the distinction in the standards follow below. So transparency, as you're using it to work with your data, be transparent about how you're using it. Your team needs to understand where it's coming from. You're not expected to open the back box, but you are expected to know what went into it and be able to ask that question as well. Accountability. Responsibility runs across the whole life cycle of an AI tool, training, development, and use. As a leader using the output, you're the last link in that chain. And that's exactly where the accountability doesn't necessarily transfer to the tool. The tool doesn't own the decision, you do. So if you use AI to answer your question, you have to be accountable for that decision and how it pulled the data, how it analyzed, etc. That's where I would recommend generally taking AI and being very clear with how and when you're using it in your process. And don't just use it throughout. It can get very messy very quickly and you lose sight of what it's pulling. Human oversight, and this is the balance. AI can automate a task, but human needs to remain able to take control, and especially in critical decisions. The same logic, whether it's a driver assistant system or a leadership call, AI supports and a person stays in command. So ultimately, you need to come back to that. Fairness, and this is a really big one. AI systems are trained on whatever data and models they are trained on. They will not ask inherently the bias or the unrepresentation of the data, and that can still be and produce skewed decisions or predictions. For example, facial recognition systems have shown real racial and gender disparity specifically because of their historical bias in their training data. Ask whose experience is reflected here the same way you would ask in a survey example if you were just collecting data and you weren't even using AI. Privacy. Privacy needs to be grounded in practice and not just in policy language. You need to understand your data, the security around your data, the privacy implications of it, using secure practices and giving people real control over their own information. Before you put a program or staff data into a tool, the bar isn't, is this efficient? But does this respect what people expect us to do with their information is a really good way of kind of checking yourself with the privacy piece. Ultimately, AI is a tool. And as you went through all of the framework, the AI can come into those help you frame some of your questions. It can help you discern some of the information that you might need, but you yourself need to make sure that you are still coming back to that. And you alone will always have the judgment and the overall understanding of your context. It will never replace you in that. A lot of people are fearing the implication of AI for their jobs, and ultimately, a lot of the evidence is showing that it's not going to replace necessarily the jobs, but it is making the skill sets that make us human so much more meaningful in our everyday and our working professions. Okay, communicating the decision. Alrighty, so Priya's decision communicated. Here's an example of how she communicated it, particularly if she didn't have necessarily the new information. Ultimately, she's recommending that you get more information, particularly without the new information. But what's really important is that she names the evidence she used and she explicitly acknowledges what's missing. And if she used AI, she should understand and articulate how AI was used to help frame this. The action is proportional to her current level of certainty. It's transparent, and transparency helps build trust. and it leaves room to revise, particularly in this instance, which itself is a signal of intellectual honesty, particularly in the space of AI. Communicating with credibility. There's a lot of art in terms of communication. Arguably, you could have an entire webinar just on communication itself. But here's some really important tips when you're talking and communicating your decision. Lead with the conclusion. This is just, I would say, a general recommendation. State the problem and your recommendation first, then your methodology. Methodology first gets people lost. Show the evidence and its limits. Visualize it honestly. Tie it to action, anticipate objections, and name what would change your mind. What changes is how you deliver. What changes how you deliver it would be your audience. Don't give a 14-page paper to a senior leadership. Typically, they like a nice bullet pointed list. But if you're talking to a stakeholder, you might need to change up how you're speaking to. Your mode, a hallway update isn't the same as a board memo, isn't the same as an email, isn't the same as presentation. Your risk, the higher the cost of being the wrong, the more reasoning the more your reasoning needs to show, and the decision type. Reversible calls can be brief. Irreversible calls earn the full chain. So today we covered a lot today. We covered problems, we covered framework, and ultimately just recognizing how to create more clarity in the work that you do as a leader, and recognizing that sometimes you do need to pause to ask better questions and make sure that you have the information you need to. And with AI, all of this becomes so much more important so that you can step back. So our course that we have on using decisions to make using data to make decisions really goes into deeper, and particularly in terms of data collection strategies, analysis strategies. But in general, if you're looking at AI and a number of other pieces that you're facing as leaders, I would encourage you to take a look at our Next Move micro-credential series. This is for leaders at all phases of your career, to help you understand and really build the skills that we need now, but also in the future. So to sum up, evidence-based decision-making isn't about having perfect information. It's being honest with what you know, rigorous about what you're missing, and clear about how you made the call. Data nor AI will ever decide for you. Clarity does, and that clarity is now that competitive advantage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariel. Thank you, Mariel, for sharing such practical insight with us today. And thank you to everyone for joining us. We also have active our Q&A. So if you have some questions for Mariel, please bring those questions to that side, and we are pleased to answer them. Okay? Check. Also, if you are interested to know more about this program, here in our chat, we're adding and typing the course link, and we encourage you to explore our other professional development opportunities through the University of Well School Continuous Study. Let me check if we have some questions here, Mariel, for us. No question for today's.
Oh, I love questions.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I don't see any.
Okay.
Ooh, just one. Do you have any, thank you, Catherine, for your question. Do you have any tips for how to handle it when you as a leader don't have the power to make sure more data collection happens? Ooh, I love this question because it is a real limitation for a lot of leaders. I have personally faced this in many implications and many times in my role. Ultimately, what I would be helping and what I would be saying is it kind of comes back to the questions that you're trying to ask, and then the limitations that the data you have can help you answer them. So, and helping people to understand that, and then the risk associated with asking the wrong questions and not collecting the data. So if you're being asked to, like, take Priya, for example, if her boss came back and said, well, make a decision, we have to either discontinue or run, she could say, we can discontinue, but here's the risk. But here's why I don't recommend this decision because you have a huge amount of information that you're actually missing. You can't actually answer the question you're asking. So as part of a leader, that really comes to that communication, and a big part is recognizing the risk. And this is where it's really hard as a leader, and particularly as a manager, to hear that a wrong decision now is going to potentially cost more down the line. But the reality is that that's often what happens, is that if you make the wrong call now, you're just going to face the costs down the line. So really come back. And then I would also, particularly with leadership, come back to what is your strategic context. If you're being asked to make recommendations on budget, but you're being asked, all of these other pieces, and they're not recognizing how they tie together, that's going to be a really important piece too. But yes, the communication is really, really important, and helping people to understand the risk and the implications if they don't do it. It's going to be more costly down the line.
Thank you, Mariel. We also have another question. Is there any AI program that's better for stability?
Is there an AI program
that's better for stability?
Oh, better for surveys. I haven't used an AI program to specifically go out and actually collect the survey and the answers itself. I'm sure there are some out there. What I would approach this question for, particularly from an AI, is really understanding what your strategic context is and the goal and your ultimate question. I have used Claude to help me frame the questions that I want to ask, and then used, Microsoft Forms or other tools, because oftentimes you're mandated by your organization to specifically use a type of tool. But this is where, again, I would come back to, you have to really frame what you want. Otherwise it's just going to make it up. And I think that's the key piece, is that like a human, it will just make it up. It will make up the answer. So I definitely used it. It has been very helpful. But really make sure that you understand what draw the sandbox for the AI is kind of the best analogy that I can help you with that one. Otherwise it's going to draw the sandbox for you. Someone's asking me to bring back one of the slides. Communicating with credibility. Yeah. There you go. Emmanuel, did you have any follow-up questions on that slide in particular? If not, that's fine. And Estrella, how will we be sharing the slides? I know that we're going to post it on the website. Do you mind just speaking to that part of that question?
Sorry, we are going to be have a recap of this webinar, and we're going to be posting on our website. So yeah, we encourage you, if you need to check again, you can see again the YouTube video that also we're going to be uploading.
Oh, I see another question. What evidence is, when evidence is incomplete or conflicting, what principles should determine when a leader has enough information to act, and how they should communicate the uncertainty without undermining confidence in the decision? Ooh, this is a fantastic question. So in Priya's example, her information was conflicting in and of itself. She had two signals pointing discontinue, and she had two signals pointing to the other to continue, right? It was showing value. So in conflicting information, I would say you probably need to ask some further questions, right? Because if you're getting really strong conflicting information, you need to either have a greater understanding of the weight you need to apply to certain decisions. So, for example, in Priya's context, if it really comes down to cost, then I would be going and asking, how much is this costing us to continue to run? And what is it costing us to not, if we say yes to this, we say no to something else. So what are we saying no to? And is that potentially providing a better ROI? When the evidence is incomplete, I have never actually had a decision that I've had to make when I had every single piece of evidence. Never, not once. This is where go back to your strategic, like what is your strategic context? And I would also, again, go back to your question, like what are you actually trying to ask? And then this is where, as a leader, going back and communicating how the uncertainty without undermining confidence in the decision. This is where, like when it comes to communicating with credibility, when you can show the evidence and its limits, it's easier to argue we don't have the information we need to answer this question effectively. So if I have, I'm going to use an example to help answer this question. I worked in an organization where at one point in time financially, we did not include any operational staff in terms of our program budgets, flat out. So arguably every single course looked like it made money. It was great. Wow, fantastic. But then I started getting increasing questions around, well, how much is this actually costing us? We want to say yes to these things. What is this, like, what is the return on investment? And I really had to go back and say, I have information that shows the ROI from this lens, but this piece we need to interrogate further. Here's what I currently have. And that might be something that you can say, here's the boundary that I already have, but here's where we can ask further questions. Sometimes also communicating how to quickly do it is really helpful. And going to Liz, who's raised her hand.
Hey, Mariel, I'm just keeping an eye on the chat. Emmanuel has asked if we can go back one more slide to Priya's decision communicated.
Yep. Great. Just checking chats here, Q&A, see if there's anything more. Okay. When it comes to communication, taking the time to also really align with your stakeholders in terms of the question you're actually asking can also be really helpful. So if you're saying, hey, we all agree that this is the question, this is the evidence that we need to answer that question. A lot of this is managing that communication piece and helping people to understand the boundaries that you work within versus what you ideally want. I think we had one more question come up, and again, checking on time. Not sure. Okay, any other final questions? These are all been wonderful questions, and I really appreciate. Thank you.
No, I think there is no more question for that.
Okay. Great.
So yes, so just remind that you will find the course link in the chat, and we encourage you to explore our other professional development opportunity through the University of Guelph of Continuous Study, okay? So thank you again, and we hope to see you at another SES webinar soon, okay? Thank you so much for coming
Thank you
today.
so much for everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mariel.
Thank you.